have to keep going.
Clara had been invisible her whole life, invisible to the system, invisible to the men in suits who walked past her in hallways, invisible to the lawyers who spoke over her in meetings. And on this cold November morning, as she pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the Federal High Court in Lagos, carrying a worn leather briefcase that had cost her 3 months of savings, she was about to be invisible one more time. Or so they thought. Before we continue with Clara's incredible story, I need you to do something right now. Type your country in the comments below. Let me know where you're watching from. Then hit that subscribe button because you're about to witness one of the most powerful courtroom victories you've ever seen. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear this story today. Now let's get back to Clara. The courtroom smelled of old wood and expensive cologne. Clara could feel every eye on her as she walked down the center aisle, her shoes clicking against the marble floor with a sound that seemed too loud, too obvious, too everything. She wore her best outfit, a navy blue dress she'd ironed 3 times that morning, but next to the tailored suits and designer watches around her, she felt like a child playing dress-up. Her son Joshua's words from that morning echoed in her mind. "Mommy, are you going to win today?" She had smiled and kissed his forehead, but she hadn't answered, because honestly, she didn't know. The opposing counsel sat at their table like kings surveying their kingdom. There were 5 of them, 5 lawyers from Kosoko and Partners, the most prestigious law firm in Lagos, maybe in all of Nigeria. Their lead attorney, Barrister Ademola Kosoko himself, was a legend. 43 years of practice, never lost a major case, not once. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Clara's annual rent, and when he glanced at her, his eyes held the kind of dismissive amusement you'd give a mosquito before swatting it away. Clara sat alone at her table. Just her. No team, no associates, no senior partner to guide her. Because she couldn't afford any of that, she was a single mother who'd put herself through law school while working 2 jobs, who'd passed the bar exam on her 3rd try, who'd been practicing law for only 6 years from a tiny office above a grocery store in Surulere. She'd taken this case on contingency, meaning if she lost, she got nothing. And losing seemed very, very likely. The case was supposed to be simple. A small IT consulting business owned by a widow named Mrs. Okafor had been systematically defrauded by Chemcore Industries, one of Nigeria's largest chemical manufacturing companies. They'd contracted Mrs. Okafor's company to develop a comprehensive inventory management system. Then after implementation, they'd refused to pay, claiming the system was faulty. But it wasn't faulty. Clara had the evidence. Chemcore had used the system for 14 months, had expanded it across 3 additional warehouses, had even trained 52 employees on it. Then they'd simply decided not to pay the remaining 87 million naira they owed. Plus damages, Clara was seeking 100 million naira total. 100 million naira against a company worth billions, represented by lawyers who billed more per hour than Clara made in a month. The math didn't favor her. The optics didn't favor her. Nothing favored her except the truth. And in Clara's short legal career, she'd learned that truth alone rarely won cases. Presentation won cases. Resources won cases. Intimidation won cases. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of the gallery. All rise for the Honorable Justice Adebayo. Everyone stood. Justice Adebayo entered, a tall woman in her late 50s with gray-streaked hair pulled back severely and eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single sweep. She'd been on the bench for 19 years. She had a reputation for being fair but impatient, brilliant but unforgiving of incompetence. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her notepad. "Be seated," Justice Adebayo said, her voice filling the room without effort. Barrister Kosoko stood immediately, smooth and confident. "Your Honor, before we begin, I'd like to address a preliminary matter. My client, Chemcore Industries, questions whether opposing counsel has the experience and resources to properly represent her client in a case of this magnitude and complexity. We're talking about intricate contract law, detailed technical systems analysis, corporate finance. With all due respect to Miss Okonkwo, she's a solo practitioner who..." It's Ms. Okonkwo, Clara interrupted, surprised by her own voice. And I passed the same bar exam you did, Barrister Kosoko. The courtroom went quiet. Several people in the gallery actually gasped. You didn't interrupt Ademola Kosoko. You certainly didn't correct him. Clara felt her face flush hot, but she kept her chin up. Kosoko's smile was thin and poisonous. My apologies, Miss Okonkwo. I'm simply concerned that your client may not be receiving adequate representation. Justice Adebayo's gaze shifted to Clara. Ms. Okonkwo, has your client expressed any dissatisfaction with your representation? No, Your Honor, Clara said. Then we proceed. Barrister Kosoko, save your theatrical concerns for the arguments. Ms. Okonkwo, you're bringing this suit. Make your opening statement. Clara stood, her legs feeling like water beneath her. She'd practiced this opening 100 times in her tiny office, 50 times in her bathroom mirror, 20 times while cooking dinner for Joshua. But standing here, with Kosoko's smirk burning into her peripheral vision, with the weight of Mrs. Okafor's desperate hope pressing down on her shoulders, the words felt fragile. Your Honor, members of the court, she began, her voice quieter than she wanted. This case is about a widow who built a business from nothing. Mrs. Okafor learned computer programming at age 45 after her husband died, leaving her with 3 children and no income. She spent 6 years building her company, working 16-hour days, sleeping in her office. When Chemcore Industries approached her with a contract for 87 million naira, it was the biggest opportunity of her life. She delivered everything they asked for. Ahead of schedule, under budget. They used her system. They expanded it. They praised it in internal emails. Then they decided not to pay. Because they could. Because they're a billion naira company, and she's just a widow with a small business. Because they thought no one would fight back. Clara paused, letting her words settle. But someone is fighting back. We're here to prove that Chemcore Industries knowingly and willfully defrauded Mrs. Okafor, that they have been unjustly enriched by her work, and that they owe her 100 million naira in unpaid fees and damages. She sat down. Her opening had lasted less than 3 minutes. Kosoko's opening lasted 22 minutes. He spoke about technical specifications, contractual obligations, quality assurance failures, indemnification clauses. He used words like substandard deliverables and material breach and failure to remediate deficiencies. He painted Mrs. Okafor as an inexperienced contractor who'd promised more than she could deliver, who'd created a system so flawed that Chemcore had been forced to hire another company to fix it, costing them millions. He was brilliant, polished, convincing. And when he finished, Clara could see doubt creeping across Justice Adebayo's face. The first 2 days of trial were brutal. Chemcore's witnesses were well-prepared, articulate, and damning. Their IT director testified that Mrs. Okafor's system crashed constantly, that data went missing, that frustrated employees had complained daily. He had charts, graphs, incident reports. Clara cross-examined him, but he was slippery, deflecting her questions with technical jargon she could barely follow. During the lunch recess on day 2, Clara sat alone in the courthouse cafeteria, picking at rice and stew she couldn't taste. At the next table, she overheard 2 lawyers talking. That single mom lawyer is getting destroyed in there. I almost feel bad for her. Kosoko's going to eat her alive. She should have referred the case to someone qualified. Clara's appetite vanished completely. She thought about Joshua, who she'd barely seen in weeks because of trial prep. She thought about her own mother, who'd begged her to be a teacher instead of a lawyer, something stable, something safe. She thought about the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter and the landlord who'd started asking pointed questions about next month's rent. That afternoon, she called Mrs. Okafor to the stand. The widow was 63 years old with kind eyes and hands roughened by decades of work. She spoke softly about learning to code from YouTube videos, about building her first website in a cyber cafe, about the pride she'd felt when Chemcore had chosen her company. Barrister Kosoko's cross-examination was savage. He questioned her credentials, her experience, her technical knowledge. He made her admit she didn't have formal computer science training. He made her admit she'd never handled a contract this large before. He made her look exactly like what he wanted the judge to see, an amateur out of her depth. When court adjourned that evening, Clara walked out feeling defeated. She drove home through Lagos traffic that seemed even more suffocating than usual, and when she finally reached her small apartment in Yaba, Joshua was already asleep. She stood in his doorway watching him, this beautiful 7-year-old boy who believed his mother could do anything, and she felt like a fraud. She almost withdrew the case that night. She had the paperwork halfway drafted on her laptop when her phone rang. It was Mrs. Okafor. "I just want to thank you," the widow said. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Mrs. Okafor, I'm sorry. I don't think we're going to win this." There was a long silence. Then Mrs. Okafor spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "My dear, you stood up when no one else would. Every other lawyer I contacted told me to forget it, to move on, that I couldn't fight a company like Chemcore. But you believed me. Win or lose, you gave me dignity. You made them see me. That's already more than I expected." After they hung up, Clara deleted the withdrawal paperwork. She made coffee, and she went back to work. Day 3 began with Chemcore's technical expert, a man with a PhD in computer science from MIT who'd reviewed Mrs. Okafor's code and found it, in his professional opinion, deeply flawed. He spoke for 90 minutes, using terminology so complex that Clara saw Justice Adebayo taking fewer and fewer notes, a bad sign. When it was Clara's turn to cross-examine, she stood slowly. "Dr. Adelek, you reviewed the source code for Mrs. Okafor's inventory management system, correct?" "Yes. How long did that review take?" "Approximately 40 hours. And you found numerous errors, bugs, and inefficiencies?" "That's correct." "Dr. Adelek, do you know what version of the code you reviewed?" The expert blinked. "I reviewed the code provided by Chemcore's legal team." Clara walked to her table and picked up a document. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit 17 into evidence. These are the system logs from Chemcore's servers, obtained through discovery. They show that Chemcore used Mrs. Okafor's system version 2.3 for 14 months. Dr. Adelek, what version did you review?" The expert checked his notes. "Version 1.1. The initial prototype," Clara said. "Not the final implemented system. You reviewed a development version that was never meant for production use, and you based your entire expert opinion on that?" The expert's face reddened. "I reviewed the materials I was given. Did Chemcore's lawyers tell you there were multiple versions?" "I don't recall. Did they provide you with the final version that was actually deployed?" "No. So your 40-hour review, your expert opinion, your testimony about how flawed the system was, all of that was based on an outdated prototype, not the actual system Chemcore used for over a year?" "Objection," Kosoko called out. "Argumentative. Sustained," Justice Adebayo said. "But Ms. Okonkwo, you may rephrase." "Dr. Adeleka, is it standard practice to evaluate a software system by reviewing only the prototype and not the production version?" "No," the expert admitted quietly. "It's not." Clara sat down. She caught Kosoko's eye, and for the first time his smirk faltered. But the victory was small, and the case was far from over. Chemcore still had witnesses, still had documentation of complaints, still had the weight of their corporate credibility, and Clara still had the problem that would make or break everything. She needed to prove Chemcore had acted in bad faith, that they deliberately defrauded Mrs. Okafor. Intent was everything. That evening, Clara returned to her office and pulled out the boxes of discovery documents for the 100th time. Emails, memos, meeting notes, everything Chemcore had been forced to turn over. She'd read through most of it, but Discovery had produced thousands of pages, and she'd been focused on the technical documents, the contracts, the formal communications. Now she started reading the informal stuff, the casual emails, the internal messages, and at 2 in the morning, buried in a chain about office supplies and lunch orders, she found it. An email from Chemcore's CFO to their head of procurement, sent 3 weeks before they'd stopped paying Mrs. Okafor. The subject line was Okafor contract. The message was brief. System works perfectly. Expanded to 3 sites with 0 issues. But why pay 87 memars when we can claim defects and settle for 20 mam? She's a solo widow, won't have resources to fight. Advise legal to start documenting problems. Clara read it 3 times, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. This was it. Smoking gun. Proof of intent. proof of fraud. She barely slept. At 6 a.m., she was back at the courthouse, waiting for the doors to open. When trial resumed, Kosoko called his final witness, Chemcor's CEO, a polished man named Mr. Obies who spoke about corporate responsibility and quality standards. Clara's cross-examination was short. Mr. Obies, do you know your CFO, Mr. Adebanjo? Of course. Do you regularly communicate with him about major contracts? Yes. Clara approached the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit 49. This is an email from Mr. Adebanjo to Mr. Ogunlai, Head of Procurement, dated November 12, 2023. May I read it aloud? Justice Adebayo examined the document. Proceed. Clara read the email word for word. The courtroom went completely silent. When she finished, she looked at Mr. Obies. This email was sent 3 weeks before your company stopped paying Mrs. Okafor. Your CFO admits the system works perfectly, then instructs staff to manufacture problems to avoid payment. Were you aware of this strategy? Mr. Obies' face had gone pale. I've never seen this email. But you received discovery requests. This email should have been disclosed. Objection, Kosoko shouted, standing so fast his chair scraped loudly. Your Honor, we need to verify the authenticity of this document. It came from your client's own servers, Clara said. Your IT department produced it in discovery. It's authenticated by metadata. It has your client's domain. It's real. Justice Adebayo was reading the email herself now, her expression darkening. Barrister Kosoko, did you review this email before trial? Your Honor, we received thousands of pages. Did you review this email? Kosoko hesitated. No, Your Honor. Justice Adebayo looked at Clara. Continue, Ms. Okonkwo. Clara turned back to the CEO. Mr. Obias, your CFO's email describes a deliberate strategy to defraud Mrs. Okafor. It admits the system works perfectly. It proposes manufacturing defects to avoid payment. This isn't a contract dispute. This is fraud. We, Mr. Obias stammered, we may have had miscommunications in our organization, but you used Mrs. Okafor's system for 14 months. You expanded it to 3 facilities. You trained 52 employees on it, and then you simply decided not to pay because you thought she couldn't fight back. Isn't that exactly what happened? Yes or no, Mr. Obies? The CEO looked at his lawyers. Kosoko was pale, whispering furiously with his associates. No help was coming. I believe there may have been, the CEO started, then stopped. His shoulders slumped. Yes. The courtroom erupted. Justice Adebayo's gavel cracked like thunder. Order! Order in this court! Clara sat down, her hands shaking. She could see Mrs. Okafor in the gallery, tears streaming down the widow's face. The final arguments were almost anticlimactic. Kosoko tried to salvage the case, arguing that one email didn't represent company policy, that there were still legitimate quality concerns, that the damages Clara sought were excessive, but his confidence was gone. His voice lacked its earlier certainty. When Clara stood for her closing argument, she felt different, stronger. She'd been underestimated her entire life, by her high school teachers who said law school was too hard, by the lawyers who wouldn't hire her because she'd gone to a state university instead of a prestigious one, by her son's father who'd left when he found out she was pregnant, telling her she'd never amount to anything, by everyone in this courtroom who'd looked at her and seen someone too young, too inexperienced, too alone. Your Honor, Clara said, her voice clear and unwavering. Chemcore Industries thought Mrs. Okafor wouldn't fight. They thought because she was a widow, because she ran a small business, because she didn't have resources, that they could cheat her with impunity. And they thought I couldn't stop them, because I'm a solo practitioner, because I work from a small office, because I don't have a team of lawyers behind me. She paused, meeting Justice Adebayo's eyes. But the law isn't about who has the most lawyers, or the biggest office, or the most expensive suit. It's about what's right. And what Chemcore did was wrong, deliberately, calculatedly wrong. They didn't just breach a contract. They orchestrated a fraud. They admitted it in their own emails. They thought they'd get away with it. Clara's voice rose slightly. Mrs. Okafor delivered everything she promised. Chemcore benefited enormously from her work. They owe her 87 million naira in unpaid fees, and for the fraud, for the emotional distress, for trying to destroy a business she built from nothing, they owe her 13 million more. 100 million naira total. Not as a windfall, Your Honor, but as justice, as recognition that you cannot prey on people you perceive as weak, that in this courtroom, we're all equal. She sat down. The silence was profound. Justice Adebayo announced she'd deliver her ruling in 1 week. Those 7 days were the longest of Clara's life. She tried to work on other cases, but couldn't focus. She took Joshua to the park and pushed him on the swings while her mind ran through every moment of the trial, second-guessing decisions, spotting mistakes, imagining disasters. The night before the ruling, she couldn't sleep at all. She sat in her living room with a cup of tea that went cold while she stared at nothing. At 4 a.m., Joshua padded out in his pajamas. "Mommy, why are you awake?" Clara pulled him onto her lap. "Just thinking, baby, about your big case?" "Yes. Are you going to win?" Clara kissed his forehead. "I don't know, but I did my best." "That's what you always tell me to do," Joshua said. "Do my best and be brave." Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks. "You're right. That's exactly right." The courtroom was packed for the ruling. Clara had never seen so many people there. Word had spread about the case, about the email, about the single mother lawyer taking on corporate giants. Journalists lined the back wall. Law students filled the gallery. Mrs. Okafor sat in the front row with her children beside her. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Justice Adebayo entered and sat. The room remained standing until she nodded. "Be seated." Clara's heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. "I've reviewed all evidence and testimony in the matter of Okafor IT Solutions versus Chemcore Industries." Justice Adebayo began. Her voice was measured, impossible to read. This case initially appeared to be a straightforward contract dispute. However, evidence presented at trial revealed something far more troubling. The judge looked directly at the Chemcore executives in the gallery. The email from Mr. Adebanjo, Chemcore's chief financial officer, is not merely a smoking gun. It is a confession, a deliberate, calculated plan to defraud Mrs. Okafor by manufacturing defects in a system that, by Chemcore's own admission, worked perfectly. This is not a gray area of contract interpretation. This is fraud. Clara felt Mrs. Okafor grab her hand. The court finds that Chemcore Industries knowingly and willfully breached their contract with Okafor IT Solutions. More significantly, the court finds that Chemcore engaged in fraudulent misrepresentation and acted in bad faith. The evidence shows they used Mrs. Okafor's system for 14 months, expanded it across multiple facilities, and then decided simply not to pay because they believed she lacked the resources to fight back. Justice Adebayo paused. Clara could barely breathe. They were wrong. And the law must reflect that such conduct has consequences. Therefore, the court awards the plaintiff, Okafor IT Solutions, the full amount of unpaid contract fees, 87 million naira. Additionally, for the fraudulent conduct and the emotional and financial harm caused, the court awards damages of 13 million naira, for a total judgment of 100 million naira. The courtroom exploded. People cheered, gasped, shouted. Mrs. Okafor collapsed against Clara, sobbing. Clara felt her own tears flowing freely as she held the widow, both of them shaking. "Order," Justice Adebayo said, but there was something that might have been a smile at the corner of her mouth. "Order, please." When the room quieted, the judge continued. Furthermore, the court notes the exceptional work of counsel for the plaintiff. Ms. Okonkwo, you faced significant disadvantages in resources and experience. You were underestimated and, I suspect, disrespected throughout this process. Yet you uncovered the truth, presented it clearly, and served your client with remarkable dedication. That is what this profession should be. Clara could barely see through her tears. "Thank you, Your Honor." As for Chemcore Industries and their counsel, Justice Adebayo's voice hardened. "This court takes fraud seriously. I'm ordering a full investigation into whether criminal charges should be filed against relevant executives. Additionally, I'm referring Barrister Kosoko and his firm to the Bar Association for review of their conduct in failing to properly review discovery materials that would have revealed their client's fraudulent intent. Kosoko stood, his face ashen. Your Honor, court is adjourned, Justice Adebayo said, and struck her gavel one final time. Clara stood on trembling legs as the courtroom erupted again. People she didn't know were hugging her, congratulating her. Journalists pushed forward with cameras and microphones, but Clara only saw Mrs. Okafor, whose face was transformed with joy and relief. Thank you, the widow kept saying. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We did it together, Clara said. You had the courage to fight. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun felt warmer than Clara remembered sun feeling. She stood on the steps, watching the crowd disperse, and pulled out her phone. She had 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, 6 voicemails. The legal community was exploding with news of the verdict, but Clara ignored all of it and called Joshua's school. Can I speak with my son, please? It's important. A few minutes later, his small voice came on the line. Mommy, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, baby. Nothing at all. I just wanted to tell you that I won. We won. You won 100 million? Clara laughed, actually laughed. Yes, baby, we won. I knew you would, Joshua said with the absolute certainty only a child can have. You're the best lawyer in the whole world. Clara closed her eyes, letting tears fall freely now. Thank you, baby. I love you so much. After she hung up, she just stood there for a while, watching Lagos move around her. Cars honking, people rushing, the city that never stopped. She'd been invisible in this city for so long. The single mom, the solo practitioner, the lawyer in the tiny office above the grocery store, the woman men like Kosoko dismissed with a glance. But she wasn't invisible anymore. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The ruling made national news. Legal blogs dissected the case. Law students studied her cross-examination techniques. Other solo practitioners reached out, inspired. Clients started calling. People who'd been turned away by bigger firms, people who felt powerless against corporations and systems designed to crush them. Clara hired her first associate, a young woman fresh from law school who reminded Clara of herself. She moved to a bigger office. Nothing fancy, but with actual space for a conference room and a small library. She bought Joshua new school uniforms and signed him up for the football academy he'd been begging to join. But more than the money, more than the recognition, Clara had something she'd never quite had before. Belief in herself. In the system she'd devoted her life to. In the idea that justice wasn't just for people who could afford it. 3 months after the verdict, she got a letter from Justice Adebayo. It was handwritten, just a few sentences on personal stationery. Ms. Okonkwo, in my 19 years on the bench, I've seen many lawyers. Very few have your combination of preparation, integrity, and courage. The law needs more advocates like you. Continue to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. The signature was simple. Adebayo. Clara framed that letter and hung it in her new office, right next to her law degree and a photo of Joshua. Mrs. Okafor used her settlement to expand her business. Within a year, she'd hired 12 employees and landed contracts with 3 more major companies. She visited Clara's office once a month, always bringing home-cooked food and stories about her grandchildren. The two women had become friends, bonded by the battle they'd fought together. Clara never forgot what it felt like to be underestimated. To walk into that courtroom and see dismissal in every eye. To hear lawyers at the next table saying she wasn't qualified. To watch Kosko's smirk and feel the weight of his 43 years of experience crushing down on her. She never forgot because she never wanted to make someone else feel that way. When young lawyers called asking for advice, she took the calls. When clients came to her office nervous and afraid, she remembered Mrs. Okafor's quiet dignity, and she treated them with respect. When opposing counsel tried to intimidate her, she remembered that email, that moment when everything changed, and she smiled. Because she knew what they didn't. Underestimation is a weapon that cuts both ways. While they're dismissing you, you're preparing. While they're underestimating you, you're working. While they're certain of victory, you're finding the evidence that will destroy them. Clara thought about this as she stood in front of another packed courtroom 2 years later, arguing another impossible case for another client. Everyone said she couldn't help. She thought about it and she smiled, because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. Being underestimated isn't a weakness, it's an advantage. The moment people decide you can't win is the moment they stop taking you seriously. And that's when you strike. The gavel came down. Another victory. Clara gathered her papers, nodded to the judge, and walked out of the courtroom with her head high. Behind her, she could hear people whispering, wondering how she'd done it again. How this solo practitioner kept beating the biggest firms in the country. She didn't stop to explain. She had another case to prepare, another client to call, another fight to win. Because Clara had learned something that cold November morning when she'd walked into court alone and afraid. You don't need the biggest office, or the most lawyers, or the fanciest degree. You need preparation, courage, and the absolute refusal to let anyone tell you that you can't. The sun was setting over Lagos as Clara drove home, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Traffic was heavy, but she didn't mind. She thought about Joshua, who was probably doing homework at the kitchen table right now. She thought about the stack of new case files waiting for her tomorrow. She thought about all the people out there who felt powerless, invisible, underestimated, and she smiled. Because she knew something they didn't yet. The underestimated ones, the dismissed ones, the people everyone counts out, they're the most dangerous. Because they have nothing to lose and everything to prove. And when they walk into that courtroom, when they stand up and speak their truth, when they refuse to be invisible anymore, that's when miracles happen. That's when justice happens. Real justice, the kind that changes everything. Clara turned on her street and saw Joshua waiting by the window, waving at her car. She waved back, her heart full. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new people who would look at her and see someone they could beat. Let them look. Let them underestimate. Let them smile their dismissive smiles and wear their expensive suits and bring their teams of lawyers. Because Clara knew the truth now. She'd learned it in that courtroom, fighting for Mrs. Okafor, fighting for justice, fighting to be seen. The truth was simple. Never count out the single mom with everything to lose and nothing to prove except that she belongs. Never dismiss the solo practitioner with the worn briefcase in the ironed dress. Never underestimate the woman who's been invisible her whole life, because she spent that whole life watching, learning, preparing for the moment when someone finally pays attention. And when that moment comes, when the spotlight finally finds her, she won't waste it. She'll use every second of it to prove that she was never the underdog. She was always the fighter, always the winner, always exactly where she belonged. Clara parked her car and walked toward her home, toward her son, toward whatever tomorrow would bring. Behind her, the city continued its endless motion. And somewhere in that vast, complicated, beautiful city, someone else was being underestimated. Someone else was being told they couldn't win, couldn't succeed, couldn't matter. Clara hoped they'd remember her story. She hoped they'd remember Mrs. Okafor. She hoped they'd remember that the courtroom is the one place where your background doesn't matter, where your resources don't matter, where the only thing that matters is the truth and your courage to speak it. She hoped they'd remember that being underestimated isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning. The first chapter in a victory that will be so much sweeter because everyone said it was impossible. Clara opened her front door. Joshua ran to her, hugging her tight. "Did you win today, Mommy?" "Always, baby," she whispered into his hair. "We always win." Because that was the truth, the real truth. Not that she won every case, she didn't. Not that everything was easy, it wasn't. But that she'd already won the most important battle. The battle to be seen, to be heard, to be taken seriously. Everything else was just details. And as Clara Okonkwo settled in for dinner with her son, as she listened to him talk about his day and helped him with his math homework, as she lived her ordinary, extraordinary life, she carried with her the knowledge that had changed everything. She was never invisible. She was just waiting for the right moment to shine. And when that moment came, she lit up the entire courtroom. Now, before you go, I need you to do something. Drop your country in the comments right now. Tell me where you're watching from, and share what Clara's story means to you. Hit that subscribe button because I share stories like this every week. Stories of people who were counted out, but who fought back and won. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who feels underestimated, someone who's fighting their own battle, and remember, your moment is coming. Stay ready, stay prepared, stay believing, because the world needs your victory story too.